Hi, everyone, and welcome to our noon hour live stream where we are kicking off launch day for the new book, Don't Feed the Elephants. I'm so excited to be with you today. Today is part celebration, part curiosity, part time to reflect and talk about this topic and why it's so important. If you're joining us, please be sure to drop a hello in the comments so we can see that. And feel free to ask questions. We'll be monitoring them as we talk. We will be here all hour, so join us. Leave when you can. Hello, yay! Okay, I don't know who it is, but your name is MMMMK. So if you want to drop in the comments your name, so I know. But I'm not alone today. I'm really excited to. Hi, Sanjita. Welcome. I'm super excited to have my colleague, my thinking partner, my co-facilitator, and dancer to the stars. Is that now? I want to bring on Dr. Teresa Peterson. So let's bring Teresa in.
I liked that, dancer to the stars.
I was trying to think of something clever, and it just wasn't happening. So
it's here. The big day's here.
It's here. It's here, and we are absolutely floored, blown away. I look like I'm all composed right now, but I just want to be really transparent with everyone. I'm just like a tender puddle of tears, and I have been all week. And so to see, hi Erin, to just see all the love and the support and the sharing has been absolutely overwhelming. And now to see it rise on some of the bestseller lists and on the new releases is. It's a little bit overwhelming, but we're so excited to be with you. We're so excited to just, talk about the book, talk about the writing process, even if, talking about the work that we do and the content. So again, if you have questions, about the writing process, or if you have questions about the content, certainly put those in the chat and we will happily get to those. So otherwise, Teresa and I, we're just going to chat and I'm just going to be like stupid smiles this whole time, just seeing all these comments come in. And yeah. So where should we start, Teresa?
The biggest question I think you've been getting the last week or so is, why did you write this book? Why elephants? What's meaningful about this to you?
Yeah. And for those of you who haven't read the book yet, I certainly covered this in pretty good detail because it's a really important part of my origin story. I spent most of my life, and I still feel like I'm an in-progress reformed avoider, right? I've spent a lot of time. I'm a hard lover, but I don't love the hard stuff, right? Like I like deep connections. I like emotional conversations, but that there were many times when I would avoid. And so personally, I was on this journey of trying to figure out how do I push past that. And at the same time, I was learning about this idea of the elephant in the room. So like this goes back to 2008. So this is how long this has been gestating. We've been using the analogy of birthing with this. I realized I was seeing firsthand at the company as we were going through the 2008 financial crisis of the impact that it was having on trust, the impact it was having on people's ability to feel safe when we were not able to have the conversations that were clearly in the room. And so I read this book, Adaptive Leadership, and one of the things they talked about is that the best adaptive teams are ones where you can call out the elephant. And it's a culture where the elephant doesn't stay around long. And I just had never experienced that. So I feel like I've been on this mission. And then I realized I'm not the only avoider. I have a plethora of avoiders, So this is my love letter to my fellow avoiders for us to unpack and understand that. Yeah. So it looks like we have a question.
We do. Have you always wanted to write a book, or is this the subject that made you want to write this book, which is a beautiful question, okay?
Yeah, I know. I want to know who that is. But now I don't. I kind of like the secrecy behind it. When I was younger, I did have this, and I don't know why. I did have this, like, by the time I'm 35, I'm going to write a book. Like, I don't know why 35 is like the end of the line when you're in high school or college. Like, that's when I will have made it. And then you realize you don't have anything figured out. Like, you have some things figured out. Hi, Zach. I just want to give a shout out to Zach, first team member with Snowco. He made this company a team, so I just want to give him some love. This when I say this has been a mission of mine for over a decade, I really do mean it. You know, from trying to learn as much as I can about conflict and resolution and mediation and relationships and navigating all of that work. So it was, and what's funny is I had like 10 different ideas of what's like, which one do we go with? And every person I would talk to is like, it's Sarah, it's right in front of you. Like, it's always been the elephants. And I think that I was overthinking it, like, oh, well, that feels too obvious. But yeah, then it just became clear that this needed to be the book, because literally everything that I'd been doing was moving towards this. So yeah.
We've got another one from our friend Zach Walker.
Oh, Zach.
What surprised you about the writing process, Sarah?
There's a couple of things, you know, because I know there's probably some of you in the audience who have written a book who maybe can relate to this. And certainly if you've written a book and want to share your thoughts, please do. Or people who are thinking about they might. You know, I think there's a lot, but two things that come to mind is, and the first one is just how incredibly vulnerable of a process it is. I wasn't prepared for the emotional swings. You know, my publisher, you know, told me as we were working on it, they said, Sarah, you will hate your book at some point. Like, you will just read the manuscript and you will hate it. And I was like, well, how could that be? I'm creating it. And it's true. The first draft, I hated it. The first draft was like, well, this chapter's got something we can play with, but this isn't clear and we don't even talk about this. But also it's incredibly vulnerable because a book is permanent. You know, I do a lot of workshops, I do a lot of speaking, and a bad presentation is temporary, right? But a bad book is different. So there's a lot of vulnerability. So that's one thing. The second thing is the type of thinking that needs to go into a book is very different than the type of thinking that might go into a presentation or a workshop. And so even though I felt like I had hit a good level of depth in working with, you know, like my publishing team and my scribes, from the standpoint of like, how do we go even deeper with it? What are the different kind of stories? How else can we showcase this and tell these concepts more clearly? So it's just a different level of thinking than I am normally in when I'm preparing for a presentation or workshop.
Sarah, I want to give, if we can highlight Joey's comment.
Yeah.
It's not a question, but he really appreciates this statement from the book. Often it isn't the tension that creates the distance, but the toleration of that tension. Where did that idea come from for you? Is there a moment that idea was born, or was it a series of moments?
You know, it was a series of moments of reflecting on the cost, right? When we're in a situation we might be avoiding. And again, when we talk about having that conversation, maybe it's not a conversation with the other person, but it's a conversation we need to have with ourselves, right? Sometimes when we talk about like, oh, we just need to call it out, we assume it needs to be this like, you know, really grand gesture, or that it has to be really aggressive or assertive. But sometimes we can create elephants for ourselves, right? And like, and we might not be willing to have a conversation with ourselves. You know, you know, it's an interesting question to think about, because that really was an evolution. And part of it is just my own personal experience, and also working with clients who the erosion of the relationship started maybe because of the point of conflict or tension, but it was like, it just kept moving away from each other, almost like floating away from each other, right? The longer that it went unacknowledged or unaddressed. And so that, I mean, and that's the other thing that I just want to highlight for a moment is we, you know, one of the things I wanted to do with this book is not just, okay, well, what do we do to have the conversation? But let's really spend some time on why we might be avoiding, where might that come from? When might it be okay and healthy for us not to address something? Because there are times when, but if we're choosing to avoid, can we come from a place of choice instead of a default, right? Because coming from a place of choice is much more powerful than coming from a default. And so, yeah. Thanks, Joey, for that comment, and hello.
Sarah, I couldn't help but notice, but there are some themes in that answer and in the podcast episode that's launching tomorrow. So if you're drawn in, if you're intrigued and you want to know more, have a good listen tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Tell us about the process for coming up with the cover. It's so fun. It is so fun. Show them the bookmark. Show them the bookmark.
Oh yeah. So here's the cover, right? So everyone can see. Thanks, Nick. I'll show you the bookmark in a second. So we're going to talk about this a little bit on social later this week, but something that I haven't spoken to very much is that when I set out to write this book, not only did I want to I want the content to be meaningful and relevant, but as somebody who's neurodivergent, as somebody who has ADHD, sometimes books aren't written for our brains. And so I'm going to get to this from the standpoint of the cover, is that that I wanted the book to be designed, and we were very intentional in how we shared the content, how we did subheadings, and the illustrations that are in the book, because it would tap into different senses. It would give different visual breaks for people, right, like myself, who have a hard time staying focused. So the layout of the book was really thoughtfully designed for a neurodivergent brain. And we know that if we can, design something that's accessible for, the ones that get left behind, it'll be accessible for everyone. And so, so the two quick things. So the illustrations are the result of my lovely and talented husband, who's behind the camera right now. So he's the one who did all the illustrations. And so our cover artist pulled from that. And we had these big conversations around what did we want the tone of the cover to be? Because sometimes you can have a really playful cover, but the content doesn't match it. And then you kind of feel like it was a bait and switch. We tried and tested like a more traditional, and it just didn't feel right. And so, as you read it, you'll see that it's very conversational. There's moments of some levity, even though this isn't a lightweight topic. And we wanted the cover to match that. So, so now without further ado, Teresa wants to talk about, the world premiere of these sweet little bookmarks. So we have these bookmarks that are created that reinforce the curiosity first model, right? And have the reminder. And this looks cute, like, oh, this is a sweet little bookmark. Just wait. And this design is courtesy of our friends over at Project 7 Designs, who does all of our graphic design work for the company. But how cute is this? His little trunk becomes the bookmark. Isn't that sweet? I think it's so adorable. Wait, am I getting the good light? There we go. Yeah. So it's just a reminder. So he just peeks out as a reminder. So we will be making those available on our store in the next week or two. And then also some fun things, some stress relieving peanuts, which are like the perfect size grip. Not that I've had to use it a lot, but I do. But yeah, okay.
Sarah, listening to you describe the cover and the illustrations always takes me back to some feedback you've gotten over and over, which is that you have a lighthearted spirit, but there's nothing lightweight about the work. Tell us a little more about what people can expect to find in the book if they haven't had the pleasure of cracking it open yet.
Yeah. I might, I'm going to quote my mom in reading this. I don't know if she'll be okay with this, but we're on it, folks. This is happening. When they first started reading it, of course, my parents, so they love it. They think I'm brilliant. But my mom said, oh, it's an easy read. And then she paused and went, no, it's not actually an easy read. And I was like, ooh, what do you mean, Mom? And she's like, because you kind of see yourself in some of them. And so the intention behind this is to invite all of us to step into moments when we might not be showing up at our best, moments when maybe we're not in a safe situation to be able to speak up, right? But also moments of what might I be doing that's not creating a safe space. And so, just because it's, our style, it's very conversational. But we're trying to balance this idea of sometimes when we're talking about such a hard topic, and I'll say this, every workshop that we've delivered on this topic, and Teresa can attest to this, that there's always a heaviness in the room, right? Because people are like, oh, what am I going to be expected to do? Am I going to be asked to free the elephant? And so there can be this heaviness with this topic. And sometimes if we can just create a little bit of lightness, it can make it easier for us to hold. It can make it easier for us to reflect and consider. But again, like Teresa said, by no means is where there's moments of levity, is it to minimize? Because there's real harm that can happen in the workplace, and there's real damage and cost to our relationships and to ourselves when we aren't, able to show up in really authentic and connected ways.
We've got a question from Sanjita. Thank you for that thoughtful response too, Sarah. Yeah. Once you decided on a topic, how long did it take? And can you share your process, joys, challenges, etc. along the way? Thank you, Sanjita. Question. I know, it's a great question. Thank you, Sanjita. I want to take it back to a real milestone moment. And this is why we all need people in our lives who are willing to light a fire under us. Back in February of 2019, our colleague Kristen Sauter, who's over our German counterpart, we love you, Kristen, we were at a conference together. And, and probably for a year, she had heard me say we just got to figure out some things so I can get time to write that book. I just need to be able to get to a point where I can start working on this book. And I'll never forget, we were standing in the kitchen of this Airbnb we rented, in her very direct German way, which I love. She was just like, Sarah, we got to make this, it's time. You need to be done talking about it. You need to start doing it. And so I just want to honor that was a really important part of this journey, was having somebody, not only believe in me, but push and say, if we're going to do it, let's do it. So the process of writing started in May. The first draft was done in November of 2019. And then March 2020 happened. And then everything changed. And so it definitely took a little bit longer, just because, we were and still are in such uncertainty and complexity. And, and the other thing that was challenging, and I know other people who have written books during this time felt the same way, is we as a collective community were changing because of everything that was happening, right? With the pandemic, the increased awareness of racial injustice, the political divisiveness, even just the severe weather conditions, right? We were experiencing a lot collectively. And so navigating what was true of the book and the tone versus, and how did it meet who I was now and where the world was now, that was something that was sort of and we almost ended up sort of rewriting, I ended up reworking the book pretty substantially. And so that's where we're at. We've got a great question from Leslie. Hi, Leslie. How do you feel the virtual component of the workplace is now feeding the elephants?
Yeah.
Very, very popular, timely question, Leslie. Thank you for that.
There's a couple of ways I want to answer this. And Teresa, I'm sure you've got some thoughts too. I think that there's a way we can answer it of what are some common elephants. And then there's a way of how does it impact our ability to have conversation. So I want to start with this one. There's definitely in companies that have shifted to virtual, right? There's and are trying to maybe navigate back. I think there's a lot of things going unsaid about why do we want to go back the old way, right? And in meaning really, why do we want to go back? Do we want to go back because that was most efficient and effective? All engagement scores would tell us probably not. Most people who are experiencing this, probably not. But are we Do we want to go back in because that's what feels familiar and comfortable for me as the person who's in the position of power and authority, right? Like there's some real elephants. There's some real things I think we're avoiding. And again, not just talking about, but taking that time to get curious with ourselves, to really reflect and go, what is it about this that's such a struggle for me? So from the standpoint of the, like, how's it showing up virtually? I mean, here's what we're observing and hearing, because we're still, and again, like virtual in a pandemic is very different than like virtual, sort of non-pandemic state. But one, on some level, we are seeing that people who maybe like used to work in a more toxic environment, maybe were experiencing harm at work, have some layer of protection because they're not in it all the time. And so on some level, the virtual has created some protection space for depending on what your work environment is. We also find that like the meeting after the meeting has just shifted into direct messaging with each other. So one thing that's tricky is like when we were in person, you could feel the energy like leave the room when it was like, oh, we are tiptoeing around something that we're not actually talking about. And I think that it is definitely harder to notice that energetic shift virtually, especially, just because of the dynamic of it. The other thing with virtual is that, we've had to fundamentally shift, especially in the workplace, how we think about our relationships. And I think it has forced us. I don't think we've all met the challenge yet, but I think it's forcing us to have to be even more intentional about our relationships in ways we weren't before. And so, I don't know, Teresa, what would you add or what's coming up for you or for others as they hear this?
Yeah, absolutely. Drop them in the chat. We love your wisdom. Though, as you were sharing that, Sarah, it made me think of a conversation we had with a leader who was not a new leader, but new to this organization. And she said she missed those moments of being able to meet people, making her cup of tea, microwaving her lunch, like some of those more casual introductions that were the start of a relationship. You don't have those when you're eating at home. So I think that idea of the intentionality is so true. Sarah, you said something earlier I want to go back to, that you wrote this book for your fellow avoiders. Some people are comfortable labeling themselves as an avoider. Some people avoid sometimes, and some people might say, I am not an avoider. I've never avoided a thing in my life.
Yeah.
No matter
they might not avoid something for them, but they might avoid something brought to them.
Yeah, fair. No, fair. But no matter what camp you might identify with, there are some great tools and practices and concepts in this book that I think resonate with people who, despite their level of comfort with conversations. Share some more about that. Even the folks you've worked with who are pretty good communicators, what's in this for them?
Yeah. That's a really good point. We ask this every time we're working with a group, like kind of where would you fall, right? Like I just attack it, which always gives me a little pause. Like, do you receive it or do you just attack it? Because those are two different things, right? Versus addressing it. And then, I wait for someone else. And most people say it depends, right? And I think that's probably true for all of us. Like there may be situations where we can be and may feel more courageous, and there's situations where that might not be true. The curiosity first approach is just really the cornerstone of some of the practices. And again, I just want to say, sometimes maybe people present a practice or a tool as if it's the only. And I just want to say, conversations are complex because you're dealing with another human and their complexity and their skill level and their sleep level. And everything that shows up, right? Their past experiences, right? The stories that have shaped them. And one way Teresa and I talk about it is like, I can learn how to dance the waltz, but every time I'm dancing with someone new, they have a whole different dance. And maybe even if we got good at it together, there may be a day where we're not going to be aligned. When I was working as a manager and then subsequently a talent and development manager where I oversaw the organizational development, there was a couple of key patterns I noticed that were fairly consistent in a lot of situations. The first is that it wasn't common practice for people to consider the other person's perspective. And I want to kind of tease this out a bit. I'm not talking assume good intention. I'm actually not like a huge fan of that, just because often that phrase is not given to everyone, right? Usually it's the person in power, not necessarily the person who's been harmed. But that there's sometimes there's just not a consideration, or that the other person has a perspective, that they have a story, right? That they have feelings, or that it makes sense to them. And the other was real difficulty in owning your role in a situation. Now, again, it's all situational. There are some situations where you don't need to own your role, but there's a lot of situations where you probably played a part, whether you realized or not, that maybe contributed to it. So the idea of the curiosity first model, and the other thing I will say is that, when we're in a challenging situation, right? Emotions are there, our brain goes into protection mode, right? We might get laser focused on maybe in an attack mode, right? We're in that fight response, that we don't always take time to reflect on and have that self-awareness to go, what was it about this situation that was so triggering to me? Right? I just know I'm mad at Teresa. I just know that what she did was wrong and hurtful, or whatever the case might be, or that I disagree with her. But when we don't take the time to get curious and really reflect on what is it about this situation that's triggering me, we miss out on a huge opportunity to get clarity for ourselves, to clarify our values, maybe to clarify boundaries, or to understand where are we different. And then taking that time to get curious about the other person. This isn't about making up their stories. This isn't about making assumptions. It's just about priming our brain that they have a story. And then, hi, Nancy, I see your comment. You know me, Nancy, however we can serve your work, you just let us know. And then finally getting curious with, and it's not that we'll follow all of those again, because sometimes maybe once we get curious with ourselves, we realize like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was, or I'm going to make a decision to do what I need to do to protect myself, or whatever the case is. And so sometimes we can free the elephant just by getting curious with ourselves. But yeah, that whole idea of just getting curious, and I want to be clear, like that question of like, what role did I play? That can be real hard, because if I think I'm a good person, if I think that, like if I have good intentions and I'm not maybe aware of my unchecked biases, or I'm not aware that like I responded from a place of self-protection, it can be real hard for us to own that maybe we didn't show up at our best. But it is absolutely critical, especially if you want to create a culture of inclusion, for people to be constantly checking themselves to say, what am I doing to create safety or not?
Thank you for that. So much to dig into there. I want to go to a question from MK. Where did you do most of your writing? I can't say it any other way.
I know, it's just...
Yeah, it's too great. Where did you do most of your writing? Do you have a place or a ritual that you followed while you wrote?
No, I'm sure I should have, but my brain, one of the things I know about my brain is that it can go 100 miles a minute, and it can see all of these patterns, and it can see, I lovingly call my brain a constellation thinker. And so a couple of things. So, I did work closely with a scribe, a writing coach, to help me organize the thoughts, to help me identify and structure. And that process was so important because instead of me just being in my head, I could talk it out and have a thinking partner, and not necessarily that they were shaping the ideas. They were taking my ideas and helping me organize it in a way that would fit the structure and flow. Because here's the thing, writing an article, writing social post is not the same. There is an art and a science to writing a book, right? And that is, a skill I'm building. So that was really important. I have to record my thinking out loud and then go back in and reread it. Sometimes I could sit in, especially in the beginning, if there's a blank page, I have to speak it out. Otherwise my fingers can't keep up with my brain. And so that's the process. And I also know that, it's always important for me to have people who can help me, like, okay, let's organize this in a little bit different linear fashion, or here we're missing this piece. The editing was my favorite. And I think because we had the foundation, we had the structure, and it was so easy and clear. So I wrote in my dining room, in my little nook in the dining room that I've taken over. Yeah.
Yeah, we got a great question.
That's a juicy one, Scott. Thanks.
Yeah. It's good. We've got plenty of time left. No.
Yeah.
How should someone
My answer is it depends. No.
Yeah. Get ready, Scott. How should someone bring up the elephant in the room where there are more senior leaders present? That is a wonderful question.
It's a great question, and it's not a one size fits all, right? I lovingly mean it when I say it depends. So it depends on how do the senior leaders react when somebody disagrees with them. What is the culture? Is it a culture where you can speak up, or is it a culture where you can't and you shouldn't, and there's retaliation? Now, a lot of people wouldn't own and admit that that might be their culture, but we all know that we've been in those positions. What is my relationship with the senior leaders, right? I know Scott and I used to work together back in the day, and we had a really good relationship, and that culture was one where we could speak up and we could speak out. So depending on what it is, and again, there might be times where it has to be more direct, like depending on the urgency, depending on the cost, depending on the harm, that we may need to speak to it more directly. If it's something that may not be have this huge sense of urgency, or be creating outright harm, but is getting in our way and a barrier, I'm a big fan of offering it up as anyone else notice that we're avoiding this, or I'm wondering about this, and I offer it up just as a way to make it easy for people to potentially to speak to. There's a practice we like to use with our clients, which is this idea of getting off the dance floor and getting on the balcony. This comes from the work of adaptive leadership. And so if that is, that's a phrase we use, right? So if I'm on the dance floor, I only see the partner in front of me and the people around me. But if I get on the balcony and take a step back, I can actually see the whole system. And so sometimes the way that I like to approach it is, hey, I'm on the balcony right now, and I feel like we're dancing around this. Or there's a lot of things or there's a lot of silence, and I'm curious about that. Well, what do other people think? So, there's not a one size fits all approach, because it really depends. And the truth of the matter is, I just want to speak to this, especially for those of you who are in senior leadership positions. And there's a couple of chapters where we actually talk really explicitly to you, because at the end of the day, if I'm your team member and I develop these skills, if you do not know how to receive it, it doesn't matter, right? If it's unsafe for me to have this conversation with you, then it doesn't matter. And so we have to understand that when we have a title of authority, right? I use positions of power and authority because we don't believe that leadership is a role. We think it's a verb. We think it's an act. It's something some people do. But we have to be aware that if you're a CEO, that carries weight. That carries a privilege. That carries power. That carries a message, and your voice will be heard in a different way. So if you are in a senior leader position, it's not enough to assume you make it safe. You have to constantly be evaluating what are the ways in which we're maybe not. What else can we be doing to make it safe? And who is it safe for? Safe for who? Because just because it's safe for people who look and sound like me doesn't mean that it's people who are different from me. So there's a lot to unpack there, but I appreciate you bringing that up, Scott. And here's the thing, I said this early on from the standpoint of there may be times when we choose not to. If I'm in a situation where the pattern is retaliation, and maybe I just go, I live in a small town, I don't have a lot of opportunities. What can I do to potentially take care of myself, to accept that this is the situation, right? So how can I show up in a way that's powerful for me if maybe I don't have options? If I don't feel safe to be able to engage and to have that conversation. Because I know we all have good intentions, but good intentions are not the same as impact. And there are all things we do intentionally, unintentionally with our shadow intentions that might create a space where somebody doesn't feel safe.
Sarah, I want to piggyback on that. I know you've done a lot of work with individuals and groups over the last decade of the idea of intentions versus impact. And I know that some of that lives in this book. And one of the things that I think you do so well is weaving in the science of what makes this useful. Why is this more effective than, going from your gut? Talk about the science that backs up the practices in this book, and talk about the role that science, that body of work plays in helping close the gap between intentions and impact.
Yeah. And again, there's a lot to unpack. One of the things that we spend time on, and anyone who knows that I'm like obsessed with the amygdala and that part of our brain that puts us into that stress response. And that was a huge lesson for me. Was I didn't understand my physiological reactions. And as we've worked with just like hundreds of people now, thousands of people and hundreds of teams, is that most of us, we didn't take biology or psychology. We may not have this understanding of our body or understanding of you. And what we know about the human body is that we can move to a stress-based response in 0.07 seconds. That's how fast I can go from being a totally logical and rational thinker to in self-protection mode, right? To that fight response, or that I need to get the hell out of here response, right? That fight or flight response. And we actually unpack 5 different stress responses. And what we have to understand is that moment. And, like when we say stress response, the quickest way to think about it is like somebody goes, hey, I want to give you feedback. I think that's the fastest way to trigger the amygdala in anyone, right? It's just like, oh God, what did I do, right? And so we have to understand that when that amygdala floods, when it floods all of that part of our brain floods the system with all the chemicals, the adrenaline, the cortisol, the noradrenaline, that we physically lose access to our logical, empathetic listening parts of our brain. And so it's really important for us to understand this so that we can notice when we've become, we call it dysregulated, right, in a moment. And maybe that's okay, because maybe I do need to fight for something. Maybe I do need to stand up for myself. Maybe I do need to advocate and stand up for someone else. And so that moment of coming from a healthy fight response is really appropriate. But, if there are moments where Teresa says, hey, Sarah, can I give you some feedback? It's not going to serve our relationship if I come from a fight response. So really developing that self-awareness and realizing those chemicals, that reason your heart races, your hands shake, your neck turns red, you flush, right, is because your brain has been put into a hijacked mode. And to understand that it takes some time for that to subside before we can think more logically. So that's just like one of the components that we feel is really important. And what we found, and we see this with our clients, is when they start to understand that for themselves and they understand that for other people, it's not that they excuse behavior, they just see it differently, right? It's not that they shame themselves. They can go, oh, my amygdala totally just triggered then. Okay, like what do I need to do? And they can build up that emotional intelligence and that self-awareness and then that self-regulation.
That's giving me a little smile. And I know our colleague Amy is in the studio with you. The other day I said, Amy, there's just something I have to get off my chest. And then I thought of the amygdala and I said, it has nothing to do with you. It's just a vent about something else. Like it's just go ahead and kick back in your chair. It's just something I need to do here.
If I may, one of the things for those of you who, and we referenced this in the book, but I want to give Teresa a shout out. She created a practice, and she even did it this week, that is so powerful. One day, years ago in our early relationship, we were having a conversation about her role changing. Because where we are now in our partnership is very different than where we started. And so we needed to talk about compensation. And Teresa said, and I'll never forget it, it was right here when we had desks and we worked together. She said, Sarah, I want to talk about something before it becomes an elephant. I want to prevent an elephant. And I'd never heard that idea and that language before. And what was so powerful about it is that, one, I could recognize this was like a moment of courage for Teresa, because the fact that she was naming it as a potential elephant meant that there was some part of her that was uncomfortable. The other thing is that it signaled to me that this was important and that I needed to pay attention to it. And I'll answer that question in a minute. But this idea of preventing an elephant. We were having a lengthy conversation yesterday, and I said something, and Teresa made this real sour face, and I didn't think anything of it. I was like, oh, she's got a real strong opinion about it. And she comes on and says, I just want to prevent an elephant. I just took the last drink of my lemonade, and it was really sour. So that face there was not
Just so everyone's clear, that was not a
everyone's clear.
react. It was just lemon juice.
Very sour.
Sarah, do you want to hop to this question from MK?
Yeah.
So other than the elephants book, which is probably on the bedside table, under the pillow, I'm sure it's in a lot of places right now. What else do you enjoy reading?
So I can't stick with one book for a length of time. I know that's my ADHD, so I adjust. So I have a rotation of about 6 books right now. The first one is Minda Hart's Right Within, which is all about healing from racial harm, and I highly recommend it. The Wake Up by Michelle Kim, which is all about like how do we move from our good intentions to impact. They're both really, really powerful. Another book that's in my rotation right now that has literally changed my life is 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. That is one that I highly recommend. Completely changed how I think about how I spend my time and what I give space to. And that is by Oliver Burkeman. So those are 4. And then Creative Acts for Curious People. That's the newest one my friend just gave me that I've been enjoying. So yeah, I read a chapter or 2 of a different book every night just because that's how my brain works. Highly recommend The Wake Up and Right Within. Highly recommend both of those.
Yeah, 100%. Sarah, I saw a quote. I'm going to pull it up so I get it right. From the writer and activist James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And it made me think about tools in the book. And it also made me think about when we have some awareness that maybe I can't impact this the way I want, which I think is a beautiful part of the book. I don't know about other people listening, but there's sometimes you think about the yeah buts, and I feel like you do a good job of saying like, well, yeah, this is an effective way of looking at elephants. And there are some moments. Do you want to shed some light on some success stories you've had with people who maybe thought it couldn't be changed until they faced it and they did? Or those times when, here's when the rubber meets the road and sometimes it isn't going to go how we want it to go.
Yeah. Well, and I want to honor, right, where the source comes from, right? And James Baldwin and all of his work from a racial inequity and injustice perspective. So there's a couple of thoughts that come up for me, like reflecting on that, right? We talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. When we talk about the inequities and how the systems are structured, it sometimes can feel overwhelming to go, I don't know how to change the system. And something that I'll share related to that's really important and has been impactful for me, but I think can be applied in a lot of different situations, was from my good friend Stephanie Chin. And we were talking about when you're faced with something that feels so insurmountable, how do you stay grounded in the work so you can keep moving forward? And and she just said it so beautifully. She's like, you change what you can in the world that you have, right? So like, what's the role you can play? What can you do in the world that you have? And this can be applied to, right, the significant challenges we face from a system of oppression. This can be applied to maybe more benign situations, right, at work of we kind of say be the daisy in the onion patch, right? Of like, maybe my culture around me isn't one where we have those kind of conversations, but in the relationships I have, in the moments that I have, how can I create that? And then, then your question of showing up from a standpoint of when things were different, right? There's countless stories, right? There's countless stories of people who are like, oh, I'm sure this is how they're going to react. And then they actually have the conversation. They go, oh, well, that didn't go how I thought it was going to. Like that went better, right? I mean, to be clear, I'm not Pollyanna. There are times when it might go worse. And there are times when it might not change the situation. But one of the things that we're really passionate about is freeing the elephant might not resolve the conflict or the situation in the way that you would hope. But we have a couple of things. One, we're in control of how we show up in that moment. So even if like I can't control the other person, but I can feel really good about showing up in a way that is curious and candid and compassion or whatever the moment needs, and staying anchored and grounded in who I am and what my values are, and also being really intentional. And there are times when, you don't have the authority. You can't make the changes. And so what can I do so I can feel good about trying to impact as much as I can? And then like there's something that we call out, which is like there's a difference between resignation versus acceptance, right? Resignation is, well, it is what it is. And it sort of puts us into a bit of a victim mindset. It's not as powerful. I mean, there are situations where it's like, yep, it is what it is from an acceptance perspective. But I'm talking about the resignation, right? Which is different than acceptance, which is, I know that this is how they are. I know this about them now. I understand, right? Like I can't change it, but I can accept it. Doesn't mean, and to be clear, acceptance isn't the same as agreement. You might not might not agree with it, but just like I understand this is what, like the hand I've been dealt, so to speak. So how do I want to show up in a way that stays true to me and powerful for me? But I have lots of stories of like being terrified of a conversation. Then the other person's like, oh, I could tell you were worried, Sarah. And you're like, oh, was it that obvious? Yeah, it was. Okay, can we talk about this? And I mean, I think the other thing is, if we aren't able to have conversations about the small stuff, like how are we going to have the conversations we need to have with ourselves or potentially with each other about the hard stuff, which is why it's so important we build this muscle.
That was beautiful. Rest in power, James Baldwin. Sarah, what's your hope for this book?
My hope is that people are able to get a little bit more curious about being able to identify and name that they might be in an avoidant state. And again, to be able to make a choice of, am I okay with this? Or do I want to show up differently with it? My hope is that people see themselves not in a way of shaming or blaming, but going, oh, yep, shoot, I do that. Like, yep, and to be clear, just because I wrote this book doesn't mean I have it all figured out. I mean, I still have moments where my heart palpitates, and there's still times when I'll sit at my kitchen table and I'll be stressed and, worried about something. And then Nick always comes in and, reminds me, it's like, too bad you don't know somebody who's working on a book about this that could help you with this. We have a laugh. And then I remind him, this is why it's so hard. And I think the other thing is like that, and this is the work that Teresa and I and the rest of the crew are so passionate about, is that humans are complex. Like we don't fit into 4 quadrants. We don't. We bring with us trauma. We bring with us past experiences. Maybe you can make it safe, but everyone else I worked for, it wasn't safe, right? We have different values that are in conflict. We know one thing about relationships is that there's always going to be regrettable events. We also know that, this comes from the work of Dr. John Gottman, that most issues in a relationship, 70% of them, 70% of them are perpetual, meaning there's just always these little sandpaper moments because humans are just really complex. And I think that one of the things I hope that comes from this is that people are able to see themselves through a little bit more grace and complexity. And as our colleague, Dr. Chris Wildermuth would say, like the full kaleidoscope of colors, and be able to see other people in the same way. So.
For everyone joining us live, drop some questions in the chat. We love hearing from you, and we'd be happy to bring these questions on with Sarah. Sarah, what's on your agenda for today? Like, how are you? You're a few hours in. You're still going strong?
Still going strong until I have to fall asleep. Well, we're being nourished by these amazing cookies by Kiana's cookies. I'm not going to be able to get it.
Yeah, it's pretty so good. Cute. Gosh, she does this by hand. Shout out to Kiana's Cookie Creations.
Yeah, she's amazing. At 2:15, we were supposed to do a live interview with my friend Miha, who unfortunately fell ill. And so we might hop on for a little bit just to say hi to people this evening, though, because this is also our 4-year anniversary. This not only is it this is like a big day, right? It's a big day. It's the new year. It's the start of Black History Month. It's our book launch. It's our 4-year anniversary. Another colleague that I love, it's her 5-year anniversary of a company. So I feel like the moments of acknowledgement and celebration keep coming. So so we'll be joining you tonight at 7, where the whole team will be joining, and we'll be chatting a little bit more. And again, feel free to send us questions. I think that we'll go ahead and wind down. Thank you, Sanjita. I just want to take a moment. This has been a journey that I didn't walk alone. I didn't write this book alone. I didn't think about this concepts alone. Everybody who's come into my life has shaped it, continues to shape it. I mean, that's one thing I will say about writing a book, is it's just a snapshot. And I had to be really okay that it was just a snapshot of who I was, how we were thinking. And we already have like a list for what the second edition will be. But boy, oh boy, it's humbling. It's humbling to have the support that we've had. And we're so grateful. We're so, so grateful. And just know that even if we haven't been able to respond to everyone's post, we're so grateful for all of you and for helping us bring this book into life and to get it into as many hands as possible. And again, it's just a snapshot. And so if there's other things we should be thinking about, perspectives we're not considering, we are chronically curious, right? Like, we know there are things we don't know. We know there's things we know really well, and there's things that we're still figuring out. And so we're just really excited to be on this journey with you to make the workplace work better for humans, and then hopefully also think about how we can show up more powerfully in our relationships. So I think with that, I think we're good. So thank you all so much for joining us. Maybe some of you will see this evening. There may be an accordion song. But thank you again. If you haven't, please purchase Don't Feed Your Elephants. You can get this on you can buy it on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. You can get the hardcover paperback, the ebook. The audiobook won't be coming until probably early summer, late spring. And then, go ahead and just continue to support this work. And we really appreciate it. And we appreciate all of you. So thank you so much, and go forth and free your elephants. Bye, everyone. Oh, that's a cute little drawing. Thanks, Nick.